I'll be just facilitating the beginning and any logistics needed. Meanwhile, you have here with you today Sam, who is the co-founder of TDF, ReFi stuff, and also Rebuild. And he will be here with us, telling us his story and the story of this TDF and nature-backed village economies. He will explain us what are these villages and how can we use technology to transition into a regenerative economy. I'm really curious to know more about it. And yeah, so take the stage, Sam.
Yeah, thank you for facilitating and good to see you. And good to see you all here at TDF as well and everyone online. Woo! Yeah, I was just saying before, I'm really enjoying this semi-physical, semi-digital format for these kind of events, and this kind of see all the networks kind of flourishing around the world. And so, yeah, today I just want to talk a little bit about, I guess, my experience and my dream for how we can create a nature-backed economy centered around regenerative villages that can serve as a stewards to actually implement regeneration and take care of the land and provide the human resources and the natural capital and all the forms of capital that you actually need to do this regenerative work that we're going to be doing over the next 30 years to get to a regenerated planet Earth. So yeah, so maybe first a little bit of a story of where do regenerative villages come from, and why are we trying to come up with all of these fancy technology to combine with eco villages. So things like DAO and tokens and so on that we're experimenting with here at TDF. So I just want to give a little bit of background about, yeah, like how I see the trend that has been over the last 60 years and how we play into that role and how I see it going forward. So yeah, like back in the 60s, like you had the first kind of wave of eco villages being born, coming back from this back to nature movement. And there was like tons of experimentation going on in terms of socially, like when we think about those villages, it's important to remember how rigid the society was back then. So like taking the gap of going from that society and out into those free eco villages in the middle of nature, it was like a huge step. But what then, like to me, what I've seen like in the years after that and growing up in like hippie communities and so on around the world, kind of seeing like what are the main failures and what's holding people back from going back to the land and actually living on the land, living from the land and rebuilding the connection to nature. And I think like one of the big elements of that is actually economic models. And because we were so wanting to put those behind us and to ignore the whole like financial aspect of it, I think this is one of the key aspects that has made the eco-villages kind of stall in terms of their growth and adoption. And I think that's one of the key reasons why we don't have 10 or 20 or 50% of the population today living in more regenerative settlements. And so, yeah, that's a little bit where I think the recent history of decentralization and DAOs can come into play. Because essentially over the last 5 years, you had DAOs, so decentralized autonomous organizations that have been experimenting with all of these governance and economic models, kind of emulating the whole financial system over the past 300 years, going through some of the highs and some of the lows, obviously, like a lot of hype and a lot of scam stories and a lot of bad things happen. But at the same time, it's also playing in a new area and kind of rediscovering what kind of economic primitives we can build. And so one of the really, really exciting things that I kind of started learning about when I moved to Portugal was learning about nature-backed economies. And through meeting Alan Lodge, who has been like an advisor to TDF since the early days and has been a supporter. He comes here every time we host events. Like he came for Rebuild when we had the first Rebuild here. And he is the person who really introduced me to the concept of ReFi. He was a risk analyst for JP Chase. And where he ended up was like tracking like the risk associated with deforestation in the Amazon forest, for example. and how can we actually quantify those risks in terms of financial value. And those values, like we're talking trillions of dollars if you're actually measuring the risk associated with the loss of, say, the rainforest. And these kind of costs haven't been covered in our current financial projections, which is why we have like kind of this stock market growth that we've seen. But so yeah, so to go a little bit back, now I want to talk a bit about ReFi Villages, and I'm going to share screen. All right, can you see my screen okay? Cool. So yeah, so a few years ago, we went on the mission to create a network of regenerative villages around the world, and that network was called OASA. Our purpose was to create kind of playgrounds for digital nomads, entrepreneurs, crypto enthusiasts, artists, creatives, and whatnot to build home bases and to recognize that this global communities that we have of entrepreneurs and creatives and so on. We have gained so much flexibility and so much freedom over the last decade, mainly through the enablement of internet that enables us to work from anywhere. Like today we have Starlink internet at TDF. It doesn't work so well yet, but it's here. And basically anywhere in the world, you can have the same kind of productivity as sitting in Manhattan. So why would you pay $3,000 for sitting in a shoebox-sized apartment in Manhattan when you could choose to be in the middle of nature and connecting with your friends and doing what we're doing today? And so, yeah, so out of this came TDF a few years later, after having explored a few continents to look for land. We found this property where we're sitting today. And it's been evolving as a playground where we, host a lot of events and kind of at this intersection between, between nature, Web3, and like human regeneration. And we'd like to see it as layers. So at the bottom layer, we have the nature layer where we conserve the land and enforce regenerative principles on it. And then we have a Web3 access and governance of this land, which gives you a certain like legal rights in terms of when you buy into, for example, a token. And all of this being represented in the legal system and bridged through a nonprofit in Switzerland, which is called OASA. And then on top of that, TDF is our playground. So this is where we run experiments, and our goal is to prototype a regenerative economy. So we're trying to basically build out new economic models, building products, inventing new ways of living, creating forms of food production that are actually sustaining soils and restoring on water cycles rather than depleting them, and trying to be an example for how we can do regeneration. So one of our key concepts is proof of impact. It's we're trying to measure how much impact we're actually having on the land so that it's verifiable. Anyone can come here and they can actually get real metrics on chain about how well we're performing. So the first thing we're doing is, for example, tracking the growth of our biomass. So all the forests that are in our reforestation area, we're currently tracking it with Open Forest Protocol. It's very early stage, of course, but it's kind of just starting to play with these technologies, how we can stream data of data to the chain in a provable way so that anyone can verify, oh, okay, this is how these guys are doing, how much they're actually regenerating. And ideally, in terms, this is what can drive finance for these type of regenerative villages. If you start to look at them as stewards of land, now those entities become much more attractive for, say, institutional capital, could be nation states or whoever has an interest in regeneration. So basically everyone that could want to, for example, finance these kind of projects. And so, for example, we will be able to issue carbon credits or potentially biodiversity credits in the future, but also just building water retention landscapes and just basically having more water to irrigate our fields and to produce food and so on. And some of those concepts at TDF is like open source everything, make everything available to anyone to replicate these kind of villages around the world. We put the whole technology stacks that we're creating. So for proof of presence and proof of sweat that I'm going to talk a little bit about after. All of this is available to basically anyone. Right now we're prototyping it for TDF, but the goal is to use some kind of technological primitives, and that ends up with some on-chain interaction. And yeah, I think I already mentioned this, but our objective as OASA, as a nonprofit, is to basically only develop 5% of the land that we are acquiring, leaving 95% of the lands for nature. So 45% as edible landscapes, food forests, regenerative agriculture, things like that, and 50% to be rewilded, because we need to give space back to nature, because this is those wildlife zones is what allows biodiversity to exist. Without it, we're losing 69% of all biodiversity in the last 60 years, and it's only getting worse. And our goal is to conserve 100,000 hectares globally. So yeah, we are aiming to transform ownership into stewardship. And so this is basically what you buy when you buy the token. You don't buy the right to destroy or the right to abuse the land like you would if you were buying land, but you do get the right to live on the land and to get the fruit of the land. So shifting back to a sense of ownership that is closer to what native tribes used to have. And briefly about our governance, we're building a new governance mechanism called proof of presence, which basically tracks how many days you're spending at TDF and issuing you governance rights based on that, rather than just how many tokens you have, but actually how involved you are. So we have proof of presence, tracking how much time you spend in the land, and proof of sweat, tracking how much work you're actually putting into the project and how much context you have. And then finally, the TDF, the number of, which is more of like a financial type of capital, but it's an access right. Yeah, and then a few projects that we're kind of playing with, and we're kind of also just an open playground for anyone to come and run some experiments at TDF, whether you want to do like a biodiversity credit or you want to run some kind of AI food forest emulator, something like this Complex Earth, or you're looking to set up like a veggie farm. There's a veggie farm that we set up months ago that's starting to produce now. We will be able to feed 30 people on the site soon. Or whether it's like building like a whole 3D metaverse of the project, like one of our interns did at some point, or building a Hilbite filter, like we did a few months ago with the smart hoods that presented earlier. So yeah, that's it. We are a playground, come play with us. And that was kind of what I had to share about this. And now I'll leave the rest for some questions, if we have questions, remarks, or discussions.
Sam, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. Thanks for this presentation. It's super inspiring. One of the main questions that's been on my mind lately as I'm visiting a lot of community projects is how do you build how do you like bootstrap a commons on top of private property? Because I see this pattern replaying again and again, that people are trying to establish a new way of being, but the fundamental legal premise is still private, and that distorts the dynamics a lot. I understand with what you're doing there that the ownership is where the innovation is, like that you're doing this tokenized governance and like lots of people can participate. And so that feels like, okay, this is a promising step in the right direction of how do we actually reverse the enclosure of the commons. But my question is, if you have decentralized ownership, doesn't that also lead to like decentralized responsibility? And how do you manage that? Like, oh, awesome, you just built this farm that can feed 30 people. But for the farm to feed 30 people, you need someone to consistently show up. So yeah, what's the tension like between having decentralized ownership and then actual consistent responsibility and people, you know, being consistent?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's for sure like a big topic. And I mean, that's also why we are designing it with this proof of sweat, right? Like rewarding people who are actually doing the work on the ground with more governance equity basically in the future, so they can take decisions and be more autonomous. And yeah, I mean, it's like, I think it's really a hard kind of balance to find, right? Like DAOs in the last few years have kind of struggled and like expanding to like having tons of stakeholders, contracting to having like small operational teams, and we're still like in that phase of like trying to determine like how it actually all works. I think fundamentally though, like it is just a more efficient way of governing to do it at this scale rather than to do it at the scale of, say, a nation state. And so I think ultimately you will see these kind of small communities kind of thrive if we are enabling them with the right tools and the right kind of protocols. Because we've seen, like, for example, the municipalities in general, that's like a pretty good size for kind of governance, and they're pretty effective. But as soon as you get past a certain scale, you have too much like entropy in your system, and it becomes hard to kind of govern this kind of size. And so, yeah, like one of the main things that we're also doing with this proof of presence, for example, is just saying that it's also proportional to how much time you spend, which I think for us, it just makes sense. And when people hear about it, they're like, yeah, like that kind of makes sense. But if you look at nation states, the ways that you vote is you commit to being a resident in that nation state, or if for presidentials, you actually have to be citizen, right? So you have to be like super committed to that place. And now if you're traveling 9 months out of the year, it doesn't matter, you're still voting in that place. And so there's just no gradual kind of thing, and it's like either you're fully in or you're fully out, and there's like this appartenance to a nation state, which is very binary. Whereas here, when you can have multiple villages, you can have like some form belonging to multiple communities anywhere in the world, and kind of still have your governance rights in those different places, graded on how much time you spend, for example, in those projects. So yeah, I don't think it maybe fully answers your question, but yeah, just some kind of hints. Does that make sense?
It helps flesh out the picture. I'm still wondering, can you run a farm with decentralized ownership, or do you actually need one person who's like, I'm going to take responsibility for this consistently over a long time?
Yeah, I mean, what we're introducing now is more like role-based kind of type of work. So we have like 7 or 8 positions that we are basically filling in the moment. So the idea is also to be able to give you this kind of gradual participation framework where you can decide how much do I actually want to involve myself. Do I want to just like come for weekends once in a while? Do I want to get a membership and like be present like every day? Or like, do I want to come for a few months and be volunteer? Do I want to be a steward here? Do I want to work as a chef? And so basically we create kind of the skeleton for it, and then anyone can come in and play in these different roles. Whether you want to be like community curator, or you want to be doing farming or whatever. And so the idea is basically to cover like the things that need to be done like every day. Like you say, like now we have chicken and we have a farm and so on. So that needs like consistency, right? So those are roles that we would like to just have covered. And so we want to have like those basic things covered, like space host and farming and like kind of all the things that keep things operational. Just so that you know you have it going, and then enabling members to be more focused on what they love doing, but also enabling people that might want to volunteer here, or people that want to just contribute like different forms of capital, basically enabling everyone to contribute in their own way. Incentives. So yeah, I guess distributing rewards to people based on the work that they do. Basically, like 20% of the token from the DAO are reserved for sweat equity, which gets distributed. So that's a proof of sweat. So basically, the more work you do for the project, the more tokens you earn. And also, like, we can provide like certain salaries for people that are more committed to roles. And then also, like, we're going to be providing soon, we have this concept of nightly stays, like nightly credits. So it's basically like a bit like an entry point to the Web3. So before you actually go in and buy your tokens and you commit yourself to like holding those tokens forever and like coming back every year, which is a little bit how it's designed. It's more like a long-term commitment. Now we're also launching this kind of credit, which is just like you can come and you can spend one night at the utility cost. And so those are just things that we can kind of distribute as a form of reward and benefit for whatever sweat that you put into the project. Okay, we have a couple questions in chat. Can I acquire proof of sweat and presence, and so acquire rights of using community utilities? So proof of sweat, you only accumulate by doing work. So if you're doing some work and you get compensated by the DAO, say 10 TDF tokens, and in parallel, you're going to be earning 10 proof of sweat. So it's just really based on how much work you're putting into the project. And then, and this is not fully built yet, but the idea is that both the proof of presence and the proof of sweat have a decay over time, so that work done in the more recent time or stays done in the more recent time have a higher governance attribution than things done a long time ago. And then we have based on that, 5-5-1 voting model, where it's 5 times the voting weight for proof of presence, 5 times the voting weight for proof of sweat, and 1 time for proof of TDF tokens.
We have one more question.
All right.
So what can you do with the token you acquire?
Yeah, good question. So it's an access token. So 1 TDF token corresponds to 1 night spent at TDF per year forever in perpetuity, in like a basic accommodation. And so basically this is just how we divided the entire cost of the project, which is like roughly 5 million, a bit under, if you include everything like land development and sorry? Euros. What did I say?
Doesn't matter.
Okay, yeah, 5 million euros. And then we just divided that up by the total available occupancy, which is the total number of tokens. So we just take the total number of room, which is 14 suites that we're building, 4 studios, 1 house, and then 3 glamping tents on the land and some camper van spots and stuff like that. And for each of these, we attribute a number of tokens. So one shared bedroom is 1 token, a private bedroom is 2 tokens, and so on. And that gives us a total number of tokens that we're releasing of 18,600. And so that's how you can calculate the initial price per token. And so for each token that you acquire, you'll be able to come at TDF forever, 1 night per year at the utility cost. So you still have to cover like a fee for like food and electricity expenses, stuff like that. But you're not paying basically as a part of rent, like if you had like a landlord or whatever. So yeah, that's what they give you.
Thank you. So it seems that we have 2 more minutes. So there are no more questions. Is there any website that you'd like to share? Any link? How can people find you?
Yeah, we can. I can put it in the chat, but it's traditionaldreamfactory.com. Yeah, and yeah, we're gonna be hosting a bunch of events every 2 weeks, give or take. We're gonna be launching our token launch mid-May. So for anyone that is curious or just wants to come and play in our playground, mid-May will be the next big event. And yeah, our token is in private sale right now. So if you're interested, you can reach out to Bia or me. And yeah, we're gonna go live with a token on mainnet, hopefully sometime in the next few weeks. And then we're gonna be rolling out some of the governance protocols in the weeks after that. And everything is already available on the website on traditionaldreamfactory.com. And soon we're gonna enable all of the features for you to actually be able to spend your tokens directly on traditionaldreamfactory.com as well, and to also buy your tokens on the seller network there. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your inspiration and for all these new ideas, and thank you for opening minds and dreaming about the future.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Should I put on a little closing track?
Well, we can all clap.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys.